Hello, friends. This is your brother Dennis. I'm going to try to share another one of my favorite stories out of the Bible with you with a purpose. Let's talk about if you feel like you're wandering in the wilderness. See, the wilderness experience can look different to different people. Well, I will describe it as a place where, in spite of the fact your needs might be being met, as far as, like you're not starving, food is coming, you have shelter, but there are other things going on in the place where you have that food and shelter that you're just unsettled, or you even more so feel maybe God isn't even anywhere near you, right? He seems silent or distant or non-existent. Silent, distant, or non-existent. Of course, none of these things are true of God, but it can feel that way, right? I'm personally and myself am trying to work out of a pretty dark place, yeah? But you keep digging, right? Till you find what you're looking for. This ain't about me. This is about you and God. So, let's talk about the Exodus, the book of Exodus and the Israelites, and not to minimize the story and some of the huge events that took place there, but I want to move forward through it briefly with some highlights. For the few people who might not know or haven't ever cracked the Bible or don't know the stories, and never assume. So essentially, God built this mighty nation of Israel under the slavery of Egypt, under hard labor, for a certain amount of time. Along comes this character named Moses. His name literally means to draw out, or drawing out, which is interesting to look at. He both helped to draw the people out of the slavery of Egypt and also was drawn as a baby out of the water. God's sense of humor. Silly God. There's a whole thing where God out of nowhere speaks to Moses and gets a very clear message. You guys are leaving now, so go tell everybody we're packing. And there's some directions for that. And go tell the Pharaoh, blah, 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 10 plagues. These people are leaving, and I don't care how hard your heart is about it. And so the 10th plague, children die. It's a weeping mess. Pharaoh, even in spite of the hardness of his heart, says, yeah, go. Just don't care. So they cautiously pack and with their heads down, looking behind over their shoulder, leave Egypt forever. And about a little shortly after they've left, of course, somebody in the Pharaoh's court comes to him like, oh my God, you just let the whole workforce go. So we're all lazy now because for 400 years somebody else did the work. So, might want to address that. So, of course, they mount up, and now he's angry. I feel like this is when somebody says something humiliating to you, but they're bigger than you, or you're intimidated by them, and so you're like, okay, whatever, and then they walk away. Then after they walk away, man, what I should have said was, yeah, I feel like this is one of those moments where Pharaoh's like, hey, yeah, you're right. Those guys are going to come back and go back to work. Did you see what they did? Of course, they all drown in the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. And so nobody's chasing these guys. Right? They literally stood on the other side and watched the water closing over top of them. Now, they're at the beginning, first part of the wilderness. Right? If you don't know the story, they wandered around for 40 years. And literally, their bones are still in that desert today. Because of that. They started out grumbling right away. Around Exodus chapter 16, if you read, they're complaining about the lack of food. And God says, because you know that I am with you. That night, a bunch of quail came into the camp, and they had meat that night. And the next morning, when the dew settled and just before the sun come to burn it up, it solidified into this stuff called manna. You look that up. The word manna literally translates to the phrase, what is it? And I think we read it like, what is it? We want to read it. We want to spiritualize manna like it. Oh, my God. What is it? I don't think it's that at all because these guys are famous for grumbling. I think Moses comes to them telling them, hey, gather this stuff up because this is what you're going to be eating every day until you die here 40 years from now. So what is this? This is it? What is it? It was more in that spirit, I think, but proven by the fact that those bones are still in the wilderness. So they don't get to go. I think that the lesson to learn here is that you can get so tied up into the temporal, into the wilderness experience. Like, I've been so petty about my struggles. It is the equivalent of being one of those Israelites and picking up a handful of sand from that wilderness and picking a grain out at a time and being mad at into every individual grain. I'm a maniac. I'm digging my way out of that. Part of that is leaving this message for you, sharing this teaching with you. Because they couldn't keep their focus off the wilderness, God's like, fine, stay there, When you guys die there, the next ones will learn from your lessons, hopefully. Then I can go do this wonderful thing that I'm trying to do here. Now, that's a more than 2,000-year-old story that you may or may not believe, and a book that you may or may not believe, that is still nonetheless useful for us today. So, how if you're in what you're experiencing, or I am in, what I believe to experiencing a wilderness experience, I think there's a lesson to learn here, two lessons to learn here. Exodus chapter 40 tells us, and you can read this for yourself, I ain't got no reason to lie to you, that they had during the day a cloud of smoke, a visible cloud of smoke, and every night a pillar of fire. And this was obvious, physical, easily seen manifestations of God, right? And they were provided for every single day. What is this? This is what I got? I think the way out of the wilderness is to realize and be happy for and joyful for the daily provision of God. Well, that's difficult sometimes if you're a place where food isn't coming readily to you. If your daily needs aren't being met, that's a different thing. I'm talking about spiritual growth. If your physical needs aren't being met, then I don't expect that this message has any bearing for you. In fact, I love you. Sorry about where you are. If your daily needs are being met, right, then there's no reason not to start looking for that cloud or that pillar of fire, right? The truth of the matter is, I don't know what your faith is, but as a Christian, I am forced to believe, if I take the scriptures to be true, that I am a loved and cherished child of God. And even though I might not obviously see that obvious physical cloud by day and that obvious physical fire by night, if my needs are being met daily, then it must mean that I just need to be patient until the opportune time where I can be led into Jericho and knock the walls down. Right? And maybe the same is true of you. We need to change our focus from what's going on around us. Listen, the enemy can and will to cause a hurricane, vacuum, tornado of bullshit around you to keep you looking at what's going on around you instead of seeing or even looking for that pillar of fire or that little dark cloud. Listen, sometimes that cloud would keep them, when it would settle for a day, sometimes it would settle for 8 years, 6 months, they never knew. But listen, they had it. You might be in a period of time where your cloud or your pillar of fire has settled. And if that's the case, my suggestion is for you and for me in those times, just sit with it. Right? Get in the Word. God can't speak to you if you're not reading His Word. Me either. That's where it starts. The way out of the wilderness then is, first, quit focusing on the wilderness, right? Change your perspective. Look for a way out instead of holding a handful of wilderness in your hand and being like, what is it? Stop it, right? And recognize the daily provision that you have if that's coming to you. If not, reach out to somebody. Don't stay stuck in that place. Get out of your head. Get out of the wilderness, right? And realize and look for that cloud, that tiny cloud, or that pillar of fire. God is alive and present with us right now, today, and accessible. I would argue easily accessible, even though sometimes in the wilderness you don't sense it or feel it. Look, I hope this day has been good to you. I hope this message is useful to you. And if not, we'll both try again tomorrow.